They say broken bones heal stronger. But what about broken dreams? What about a spirit they tried to crush under a military boot? Let me tell you about the night I learned that rage, when properly channeled, can burn through any chains they wrap around your ankles. The sweat dripped down my temple as I pushed through another pirouette in our cramped living room. The streetlight outside cast long shadows through the window, and I could barely see my reflection in the small mirror I'd propped against the wall. My muscles screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when this audition was my only ticket out of this hellhole. This is it, I whispered to myself, forcing my exhausted legs into another grand jeté. Either I fly, or I drown in this swamp forever. From the living room, the TV blared some mindless reality show. I could hear Frank's gruff voice barking at the screen, Brenda's hollow laughter punctuating whatever garbage they were watching. The sound of their existence was like nails on a chalkboard, a constant reminder of everything I was desperate to escape. Tomorrow was the audition for Eastwood Conservatory of Arts. A full scholarship. A chance to study dance thousands of miles away from this toxic waste dump they called home. It was more than just an education. It was freedom. I collapsed onto my bed around 2 a.m., my body aching but my mind racing. The blue sequin dress I'd made hung on my closet door, shimmering even in the darkness. It was perfect. I was ready. I had to be. The next morning arrived too quickly. I woke to the acrid smell of cheap coffee and stale cigarette smoke, the signature perfume of the Reynolds household. My alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but I could already hear Frank planted at the kitchen table, a beer in hand despite it being barely 7 a.m., watching some obnoxiously loud sports show. I steeled myself and walked into the kitchen. Brenda sat across from him, scrolling through her phone with that vacant expression she always wore, like she was perpetually disappointed with everything and everyone around her. Frank's eyes locked onto me immediately. Well, if it isn't our little dancing puppet, today's your big show, right? I gripped the counter, willing myself to stay calm. It's an audition, Dad, for Eastwood. It's a real opportunity. His laugh was like gravel scraping against concrete. Eastwood? Who the hell do you think you are? Some Broadway star? Don't waste your time on pipe dreams, Harper. You'll just twist yourself into knots like the worm you are, then crawl right back here where you belong. Brenda didn't even look up from her phone. She's right, you know. Stop deluding yourself. You should just get a stable job at Gary's grocery store. At least that's realistic. The words hit like physical blows, but I'd built up armor over the years. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood and turned back toward my room. Their mocking laughter followed me down the hallway, seeping under my door like toxic gas. I spent the next hour getting ready with trembling hands. The blue dress fit perfectly, darker and more mysterious than anything I'd ever worn. I did my own hair and makeup, studying my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked different today, harder, more determined. This is the last time I let them hurt me, I whispered to my reflection. The absolute last time. The audition was being held at Liberty Hall, an old community center in the outskirts of our New Jersey town. It had seen better days, but they'd renovated the small stage specifically for regional auditions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my battlefield. I was ready to leave when I stepped out of my room, my dance bag slung over my shoulder, my head held high despite everything. Frank was waiting. He looked at me with those cold, cruel eyes, the ones that had watched me struggle my entire life with nothing but contempt. Oh, look at this. The star is rising. Ready to make a fool of yourself for everyone to see? I tried to walk past him. I really did. I was so close to the door, so close to freedom. Then he stuck out his leg. The heavy military boot caught me right across my shin with brutal force. I heard the sickening crack before I felt the explosion of pain. My knee buckled, and I crashed to the floor, my head slamming against the worn carpet. The sound that came out of my throat was barely human. Ha ha ha. Frank's laughter boomed through the house. Now your legs match your life, Harper. Broken. Pathetic. Useless. I lay there on the floor, unable to move, unable to breathe. The pain was excruciating, radiating up my entire leg. But worse than the physical agony was the crushing weight of betrayal, of pure, undiluted hatred from the man who was supposed to protect me. Brenda appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, completely unfazed. Well, at least now you can milk the sympathy vote from the judges. Might actually get you some points. I looked up at them through tears that weren't from pain but from rage so intense it threatened to consume me whole. I locked eyes with Frank, then Brenda, and something inside me shattered completely. But in that shattering, something else was born, something cold and unbreakable. "I will never forgive you," I whispered, just loud enough for them to hear. "Never." I don't know how I got myself up off that floor. I don't remember dragging myself to the car or driving to Liberty Hall with tears streaming down my face and my legs screaming with every movement. All I remember is the absolute certainty that if I didn't make it to that audition, they won, and I would rather die than let them win. Liberty Hall loomed before me, its weathered facade somehow both welcoming and intimidating. I could see other dancers through the windows, warming up, stretching, looking so graceful and whole. I felt like a broken toy trying to compete with pristine dolls. I limped through the entrance, each step a fresh wave of agony. My best friend Delia spotted me immediately, her face draining of color as she rushed over. "Harper! Oh my God, what happened to you?" She grabbed my arm, steadying me. "You can't dance like this, look at you." I gritted my teeth. "I have to, Delia. This is all I have. This is everything. But your leg." "I don't care about my leg." The words came out harsher than I intended. "I'm sorry. I have to do this." She looked at me with those worried eyes, and I could see she understood. She'd known me long enough to know what my home life was like. She'd seen the bruises, heard the stories. This wasn't just about dance anymore. This was about survival. The head judge was Miss Sterling, a tall, silver-haired woman with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. She was a legend in the dance world, and her approval could open doors I'd never dreamed possible. She watched each dancer with an intensity that was both terrifying and thrilling. I sat in the corner, trying desperately to warm up without making my injury worse. Other dancers glanced at me with pity or confusion, whispering among themselves. I could imagine what they were thinking. "Look at that girl. She's already limping. Why is she even here?" When they finally called my name, I felt my heart stop. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd endured, came down to this moment. I forced myself to stand, ignoring the white-hot pain shooting up my leg. I limped toward the stage, and that's when I saw them. Frank and Brenda, sitting in the very last row, his arms crossed, her face buried in her phone. They hadn't even had the decency to stay home. The music started. It was a hauntingly beautiful piece I'd choreographed myself, full of sharp movements and emotional depth. Every step was designed to tell a story of breaking free, of transformation through pain. I began to dance. Each movement was agony. Each turn threatened to buckle my injured knee. But I channeled everything, every insult, every moment of neglect, every ounce of pain they'd inflicted on me into my performance. My body became a weapon, a statement, a scream of defiance. The other dancers, the judges, the audience, they all faded away. It was just me and my rage, me and my determination, me and the future I was fighting for with every fiber of my being. When I reached the final spin, my knee nearly gave out completely. I heard gasps from the audience. For a split second, I teetered on the edge of collapse. But then I locked eyes with Frank in the back row, saw that smug expression on his face, and something superhuman took over. I straightened, finished the routine with a final defiant pose, my chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face, my injured leg trembling but holding. The auditorium fell silent. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping, it was thunderous. Several people stood up. I could see Miss Sterling nodding slowly, her expression unreadable but intense. And then I heard it. Frank's voice, carrying across the silent moments between applause, loud and mocking. "See, it's all an act, faking an injury for sympathy points. Typical Harper." Brenda's giggle followed, that awful sound that had haunted my childhood. I stood there on that stage, broken and bleeding inside but standing tall, and I looked directly at them. Not with hurt, not with the desperate need for their approval I'd carried my whole life, but with pure, crystalline contempt. I took my bow knot, a grateful, humble bow, but the bow of a warrior who'd just won a battle against impossible odds. After the performance, I sat alone in the dressing room, my leg throbbing, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and residual adrenaline. The door opened, and Miss Sterling walked in. She studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Your technique is excellent, Harper, truly exceptional, but you're obviously injured, badly. It wouldn't be fair to evaluate you in this condition." My heart sank. "I can arrange for you to have a private audition next week," she continued. "Give you time to heal, to prepare properly." "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. I lifted my head, meeting her gaze directly. No, thank you, ma'am. I'll dance again right now. Just tell me what you want to see. Miss Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly. Then, for the first time, I saw her smile, a small, knowing smile. Come to my studio in downtown Manhattan. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. She handed me an elegant business card with gold lettering. Don't be late. I clutched that card like it was a lifeline, nodding silently. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of seeing their faces, of enduring their mockery, or worse, their indifference, was more than I could bear. Instead, I went to Delia's apartment. She helped me ice my leg and listened as I told her everything, not just about that morning, but about years of abuse, of being torn down, of being told I was worthless. She held me as I cried, but these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage, of determination, of transformation. I'm not going back. I told her that night, staring at the ceiling of her guest room. Not ever. Not as their daughter. Not as their victim. I'm done. What are you going to do? I thought about that question for a long time. I'm going to make sure they understand exactly what they lost, and I'm going to make them watch. Over the next few days, I executed my plan with surgical precision. I didn't sneak around. I didn't hide. I went back to that house during the day when they were at work and systematically removed everything that mattered to me. Not that there was much, they'd made sure of that. But the few things that did matter, the small tokens of my dreams and my identity, I took them all. Including Frank's prized possession, a signed baseball from some player he worshipped that he'd always kept just out of my reach, like everything else in that house. I left it at a pawn shop with a note, from someone who learned that trophies don't make you a better person. Thanks for the lesson. When I did have to be at the house, I was a ghost. No emotion, no reaction, nothing. Every insult bounced off me like rain off glass. Frank tried harder to get a rise out of me. Brenda made snide comments. But I was beyond their reach now, and they could feel it. That uncertainty in their eyes was almost worth everything I'd been through. Almost. The next day, I arrived at Miss Sterling's studio in Manhattan. It was in a beautiful building in the theater district, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Professional dancers practiced in various rooms, and I felt like I'd stepped into another world. Miss Sterling was waiting for me. Show me what you can really do, Harper. No injuries, no distractions. Just you and the dance. And I did. I danced like I'd never danced before. Every movement was precise, powerful, free. I let go of the pain, the anger, the fear. All of it transformed into pure artistic expression. When I finished, I wasn't even breathing hard. I felt alive in a way I'd never experienced. Miss Sterling handed me an envelope. Read it when you get home. My hands shook as I opened it later, sitting in Delia's living room. It was an acceptance letter. Full scholarship to Eastwood Conservatory of Arts. But there was more, an invitation to compete in the National Dance Championship the following month, with Miss Sterling herself as my sponsor. I read it 3 times before the reality sank in. I'd done it. I'd actually done it, but I wasn't finished yet. 2 weeks later, Frank and Brenda were hosting one of their pretentious dinner parties, the kind where they invited their equally miserable friends and pretended to be respectable members of society. They'd made a big show of setting up the dining room, putting out the good dishes, which were still cheap, and acting like they were something they weren't. I knew they expected me to either hide in my room or serve as their punching bag for entertainment. Instead, I got dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, did my hair and makeup carefully, and waited for the perfect moment. Dinner was in full swing when I walked into the dining room. Frank's friends were there: Jim from his bowling league, Susan, who Brenda pretended to like, a few others whose names I'd never bothered to learn. They all looked up when I entered, conversations dying down. Frank's face immediately twisted into that familiar sneer. He raised his beer can in a mock toast. Well, Harper, still prancing around like some kind of artist? Or has that gimpy leg finally convinced you to be realistic? His friends chuckled nervously. I smiled. A real smile, not the frightened grimace they were used to. Actually, Dad, I have some news. I pulled out the acceptance letter and the championship invitation, holding them up for everyone to see. I've been accepted to Eastwood Conservatory of Arts with a full scholarship. Full ride. And not only that, I placed the special VIP invitation on the table with a decisive thunk. I've been invited to compete in the National Dance Championship next month. They called me an exceptional talent. Funny, they didn't see the waste of space you always told me I was. The room went dead silent. Frank's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Brenda's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. But I wasn't done. And here I pulled out several VIP tickets, the expensive kind that cost hundreds of dollars each. These are tickets to the championship, front row seats. The best view in the house. I paused, looking directly at Frank and Brenda. Of course, only if you can afford them. I know money's always been tight, despite all your talk. Frank's fist slammed on the table. Who the hell do you think you are? I stood up straighter, every inch of me radiating the confidence they'd tried to beat out of me. I'm the person you tried to break, the person you thought you could crush under your boot. But you know what's funny? All that pain, all that cruelty, it didn't destroy me. It forged me into something you could never be. Someone with actual talent, actual value, actual worth. I turned to their stunned guests. I apologize for interrupting your dinner. Enjoy your evening. Then I walked out of that house for the last time, my head high, my steps steady and strong. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing anymore. The weeks leading up to the National Dance Championship passed in a blur of intense training and preparation. Miss Sterling worked with me personally, pushing me to heights I didn't know I could reach. The injury had healed, leaving me stronger than before. My body had learned to compensate, to adapt, to overcome. More than that, my mind had transformed. I was no longer Harper Reynolds, the broken girl from a broken home. I was Harper Reynolds, dancer, artist, survivor, victor. The championship was held at the Grand Theater in New York City, a stunning venue with red velvet seats and a stage that seemed to stretch into infinity. Dancers from across the country had gathered, all of us competing for the title and the opportunities that came with it. Backstage, in the chaos of final preparations, I felt eerily calm. This wasn't just another performance. This was my declaration of independence, my final goodbye to everything that had tried to hold me down. When my name was called, I walked onto that stage with my head high. The lights were blinding, the audience a dark sea of faces, and somewhere in that sea, I knew, Frank and Brenda were watching. The music began the same piece I'd danced at the audition, but transformed. I'd reworked it, made it more powerful, more defiant. Every movement told my story. The pain, the betrayal, the moment of breaking, and the phoenix-like rise from the ashes. I danced with everything I had, every ounce of passion and fury and joy and freedom. My body moved like it was made of pure light, pure energy. I could feel the audience holding their breath, feel the judges leaning forward in their seats. The final sequence approached a series of turns and leaps that built to a climactic finish. I executed each one perfectly, my body an instrument of precision and power. And for the last move, I created something new, something I'd never done before, a dramatic leap that seemed to defy gravity, landing in a pose that radiated pure, unbreakable strength. The music ended. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then the theater erupted. The applause was deafening, overwhelming. People were on their feet, screaming, cheering. I stood there in the center of the stage, my chest heaving, sweat glistening on my skin, and I felt more alive than I'd ever felt in my entire life. They announced the winner 30 minutes later. When they called my name, I walked to the center of the stage to accept my trophy, a beautiful crystal dancer mid-leap, catching the light and throwing rainbows across the stage. But I wasn't looking at the trophy. I was scanning the audience, searching, and then I found them. Frank and Brenda were standing in the very back of the theater, as far from the stage as possible. They hadn't been able to afford the VIP seats, of course. Frank's face was ashen, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been regret. Brenda was crying, but not tears of joy or pride. Tears of realization, of loss, of understanding. Finally, what they'd destroyed. I looked at them for a long moment. They were waiting, I think, for some sign of forgiveness, some indication that this success would bring us back together. Instead, I simply turned away. Slowly, deliberately, as if they were nothing more than strangers in a crowd. Because that's what they were now. Nothing to me, less than nothing. I raised my trophy to the audience, to the people who believed in me, who saw my worth. To Delia, who was crying and cheering in the front row. To Miss Sterling, who had given me a chance when I was at my lowest. To every person who had ever supported a dream, believed in potential, chosen kindness over cruelty. The after-party was magnificent, but I left early. I wanted to be alone with my victory, to really feel it without the noise and celebration. I walked through the New York streets in my elegant dress, trophy in hand, and found myself at a small park overlooking the river. The city lights reflected on the water, and I sat on a bench, just breathing, just being. They tried to break your legs, I whispered to myself, to the girl I used to be. They tried to crush your dreams. They tried to convince you that you were worthless, that you were nothing, that you would never amount to anything. I looked down at my legs, the same legs that had carried me through pain, through performance, through triumph. Strong, powerful, free. But they forgot something important. They forgot that fire doesn't just destroy, it transforms. And once that fire starts burning, once that rage turns into fuel, into purpose, into unstoppable determination, nothing can put it out. I stood up, feeling the cool night air on my face, and looked back toward the theater where my parents had watched me win, had watched me prove them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. "These legs don't belong to you anymore," I said, my voice carrying across the empty park. "This life doesn't belong to you anymore. I'm not your punching bag, not your disappointment, not your failure. I'm free." I took one last look at the glittering city, at the life I was about to step into, a life of my own making, filled with promise and potential and possibility. And this? I lifted my trophy to the sky. This is my last dance out of your hell. And God, it feels good. I walked away from that park, away from the theater, away from everything that had tried to hold me back. Each step was steady, strong, purposeful. I was heading toward Eastwood, toward my future, toward a life where I defined my own worth. Behind me, somewhere in that city, Frank and Brenda Reynolds would go home to their small, bitter lives, forever haunted by the daughter they broke and the star they tried to prevent from shining. But that was their burden to bear now, not mine. I had danced my way out of hell, and I was never, ever going back.